So this one time my parents had left for work. My sister had gone to school and I, a 20-year-old female, was alone at home. My neighborhood is in a fairly secluded area, situated on top of a huge hill, so it's fairly rare to have anyone visit. I was lounging around, watching TV, when I heard the doorbell ring. I never really answered the door as, again, we never have anyone visiting in the first place, and my family obviously knows how to get in the house themselves. So I just ignored it, even when it rang a second time. By the third time, I was a little bit annoyed, and I tiptoed over to the front door. The front entrance of our house is essentially a big wooden door, surrounded by walls, so there isn't any way for us to sort of check who's on the outside, unless we go to our piano room and check out the window. This means, though, that there's also no way for anyone on the outside to know if we were there, unless we're stomping around in the house or something. So I stood behind the front door, waiting for the person to leave. I mean, no one has answered your third doorbell ring, right? Surely you'd leave. Suddenly, though, there was a heavy banging on the door which made me jump. And then I heard a deep man's voice speak from the other side of the door. "I know you're in there." My heart jumped and got caught in my throat, and for a second I'm just sort of looking around, trying to figure out how the man knew. After a long silence, I heard muffled chatter, then the sound of footsteps leaving. I didn't dare open the door in case they actually hadn't left, but afterwards I called my parents to check if anyone was meant to be visiting. And no, not that they knew of. I was a little bit surprised by the odd encounter, I'll admit, but eventually I just went back to watching TV and I just sort of soon forgot about it. 2 hours later, though, I hear the doorbell ring again. Feeling a sense of nervousness this time, I turned down the TV volume. This time, too, I got up slowly and I snuck over to the piano room where I could possibly sneak a peek and see who was there. So I knelt down and slowly raised my head over the sill to see who it was. And at the door was a woman, dressed in all black. Black high heels, a plain black dress which came down to mid-calf, and an unusually large brimmed black hat, which was bizarre considering it was summertime and really hot. She had long, dark brown hair, though her face was covered by the brim of her hat. The only thing that I could really see were her bright red lips pulled up in an eerily wide smile. Beside her was a tall, buff guy wearing a dark suit too. I don't really remember much of his features except that he was definitely a Caucasian man and had a very serious expression. But what disturbed me most, though, wasn't so much the intimidating guy, but the sight of the woman who stood there, literally unmoving, smiling at the front door, which was yet to be opened. And it felt like a good solid minute before she finally took a step back and, without a word, began to walk down the driveway. The man followed her step. To this day, I'm not sure who she was or why they were there at the door in the first place and whether they were the ones which had knocked at the door earlier, but needless to say, the deep voice calling, "I know you're in there," and the image of the woman in black was not one that I forgot quickly. When I was in high school, back in the early 1990s, I used to do many odd jobs. I never worked at a McDonald's or a Taco Bell like my friends did, but instead I worked sort of off and on at an auto mechanic shop. I worked for a flooring contractor as a labourer. I actually worked several construction demolition jobs as well as scalping concert tickets. I used to make a lot of money doing this stuff and always liked working with my hands. When I worked for a contractor, we once did a demolition job at a mortuary, and we worked from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m, so we were out of there during business hours and whatnot. We also did some restaurants, bars and stores, usually working overnight since we couldn't be there during business hours. This worked perfect for me, and I would work sometimes over the weekend or 1 or 2 nights in a row. But like I said, I made a lot of money doing that kind of stuff, way more than my friends did at fast food places working after school every day. One time, however, I was dropped off at an empty house. This was unusual because it was a Saturday morning job, which I don't care because this meant the night was mine free. It was also unusual though because it was a house. We mainly did commercial stuff for this contractor, so this was different. Also, just for clarification, I worked under the table for almost all my jobs that I did back then. I was underage, but was as skilled as any adult, even more so than a few other workers too. But like I said, this one Saturday I was dropped off at an empty house. My job was to tear out all the flooring, the cabinets, the tiles, the sinks, toilets, everything except drywall and doors. Now, I grew up in a somewhat remote town, but this house was way more remote. It's pretty much just tumbleweeds outside, and the house, if I remember, had a sort of 1960s country look to it. So I go inside, and the idea was to just gut the house and pull everything out into the driveway to be hauled away later. I brought my ice chest with drinks and lunch in it, but the job should only take me about maybe the day, I suppose. And I knew that they would be back for me about 4 or 6 p.m, say. I do remember too getting started in the kitchen, and I remember being upset that there was no electricity on the house, but my radio's battery was almost dead, so that was a bummer. But this is sort of where things get a little bit fuzzy. Like, I remember looking around the house and making a mental note of everything that I needed to tear out, and I remember feeling like, a bad feeling in the house. It was older, not like it had been abandoned for a long time, but like maybe someone old lived in there for decades and just never updated anything. I also started to have weird feelings that soon led to complete lack of any power. Like, literally, I felt like I had no energy. I ended up back in the room with the radio playing in the kitchen, and the next thing that I knew, it was evening time. It was weird too, because I felt like I sort of startled myself to wake up. I remember feeling like, where the heck am I? And I got up and it was completely silent. No noise, no light. I stumble outside and look around, and I was shocked to see that hours must have passed. In fact, nearly the entire day. I quickly went back in and I started gathering my stuff and just locked up and waited outside for my ride to get me. I kind of got yelled at, but since I got paid for what I did and not time, it wasn't a huge deal, but I did refuse to go back out there, and the 2 guys went out the following week and emptied the house out. Also, I know it's going to be asked, but no, I don't and never have used drugs or gotten drunk. I've actually always been very anti-drug, because seeing my older brother spiral down with his life at an early age made me just really against drugs altogether. I definitely wasn't sick, and there was no gas or propane on at that house, so no fumes caused it. Also, like I said before, I didn't work every day, and when I was young I had tons of energy that I could have demoed that entire house by lunch probably if I really wanted to. But somehow the house just took all of my energy and knocked me out. I don't know. I wouldn't have normally slept like that in a dirty job site, especially one that gave me the creeps inside. The whole situation is a weird one, I know, and it's not something that I'll ever forget, but sometimes I wonder, what was I doing all those hours that passed? When I was in year 8, 1998, I was invited to a sleepover, a birthday party. They had set up a tent in the backyard, and altogether there were 8 girls, including me. The girl whose birthday it was lived only with her mum, who was a religious type, and she was inside. We started doing some things, like acting, like a talent quest type of thing, and my best friend and I stood up in the tent, and were doing some form of a dance singing routine or something. But during it, my best friend put her hand to the top of the tent and felt a tap on her hand. So we all sort of stopped, and I put my hand up and felt 3 taps on my hand in a sort of triangle formation, basically. Being 13-year-old girls, we were like, what is that? And sort of giggling. But then, the whole tent started shaking. Shaking violently. The girls that were sitting down were holding each other, crying and screaming. They were that scared. Then one girl decided to bolt for the house, so we all followed. As I was running back to the house, I looked back and the tent was still shaking, but when I did, there was nobody there. We ran inside regardless, screaming. The mother came out of her room in her PJs. It was late, around 12:30 a.m., asking us what was wrong. We told her, but she basically thought that we were just being stupid. We slept in the lounge that night, but we must have talked probably until at least 4 a.m. on what we thought had actually happened. We attended a Catholic school at the time, and two of the girls who actually went there went to counselling at the school because, well, they were that frightened by the whole thing. I still to this day just have no idea what actually happened that night. It was in a country town, but there were houses on either side, but with high fences. The backyard was gated with locks, and the house was really old. When we were talking until early morning, though, the girl who lived there stated that the neighbours weren't the type to have done something like this, so nothing just added up. But I'll never forget it. I'll never forget turning around and seeing the entire tent shaking like that with nothing there, and also the feeling of the tapping on my hand. My friends and I used to camp a lot in the El Dorado National Forest. We had a spot along Sopiago Springs that we used to camp at a lot, and one weekend we decided to go for a 3-day foraging camp. We brought in MREs in case we couldn't find anything, some guns, and some supplies to set up some shelter, but that was pretty much it. The first night was chill too. We cooked a bunch of stuff and a squirrel that my buddy shot, drank a few beers that we brought, and we slept fine. But the next day, something just felt off to me. One of my friends who was with me and we had some really creepy experiences in this part of the forest in the past, and it felt a bit like those. For instance, the forest was just dead silent, and we always felt like something was watching us. I grew up in the woods too, so I knew the signs of a predator, but this felt different than a bear or a mountain lion. When night fell, though, my friends went 200 yards or so up to the stream to do some stuff, and I was alone in camp. And the feeling, man, did it get even stronger. So I built up the fire nice and big, and I grabbed a gun. But then I kept hearing faint voices from the woods in the opposite direction of where my friends went. They were low, indistinct sounds, but they were really creeping me out. And my buddies had taken the only 2 flashlights. Poor planning in hindsight, I know. As I peered out into the darkness, I caught a glimpse of something moving 50 yards or so out in the trees. I snapped the rifle to my shoulder and I got the scope on it. It was really dark though, and the only light was from the fire, but I could see the outline of what I was aiming at. And strangely, it looked human, but was on all fours, and its arms seemed a lot longer than they should be. It stood a bit like maybe an ape, but really low to the ground. I only saw it for a second or two as well before it just sort of loped off deeper into the woods. After I lost track of it though, I would hear light rustling in different directions around the camp, leaves scuffling, the occasional twig breaking, stuff like that. Always away from where my friends went, like in the 180 degree of the other side of the camp from their departure. I got the sense, though, that whatever it was definitely stalking me. I kept the fire high, and I was staying sharp, looking out into the woods, but I didn't see it again. My buddies came back about 10 minutes later to find me an absolute paranoid wreck, glassing the tree line with the scope. I told them what happened, and they just got really quiet. And then told me the reason that they came back when they did is that they had started to hear the same stuff that I did over by where they were, and it really spooked them. We spent the second night of our trip with a huge fire and 3 lookouts. Nobody slept that night, and in the morning we just broke camp as quick as we could, and we just hightailed it out of there. And we never camped in that spot again.